You know, longing by its very nature can't be defined. You know, if you really knew what you wanted, you could probably go out and get it, or at least you could direct your energies to something specific. But the kind of longing that this book is about is an undifferentiated longing, just a generalized longing that is not altogether disagreeable. That is a kind of fuel, a kind of energy that allows you to keep an interest in things.
Have you been longing a lot in your life?
I don't know. You know, I don't feel when a piece of work is finished, I don't really. I forget all about it, to tell you the truth. If one or two poems remain out of a man's work, he's considered a major poet. You know, generally nothing remains of our work.
So would you actually say that this isn't important, your book? Well,
in the great scheme of things, no, it has no importance whatsoever. But you know, it's a handsome book. People, from what I can gather, people have enjoyed it. It's given a moment or two of provided a moment or two of interest, or even entertainment, or even pleasure. Yes, that's a very good story that everybody, you know, has to confront. If you're lucky, you get older. A lot of people don't get older in this world. I'm just on the at the foothills, you know, the outer reaches of old age. So I really don't know what really being old is. You know, yes, Mount Baldy Zen Center. You know. Well, I've been associated with the teacher there, Sasaki Roshi, for maybe 30 or 40 years, maybe. Then around 1993, I had just come off a tour. That was my last tour. I'd been drinking an enormous amount of red wine on my tour. You know, there were certain concerts where I would drink 3 bottles of red wine. By the time I finished that tour, you know, my health had deteriorated considerably, and my mind was in tatters, and my heart was in tatters for a number of reasons. And the fact that Roshi was growing old, and that I needed to govern my life by, you know, some kind of structure. I went up the mountain and I stayed there for, I don't know, 5 or 6 years. And I helped take care of Roshi, who was getting on in years. So I was a kind of a cook. I was his cook and driver, and just a general helper. You know, I like the life. I like getting up early and going to the meditation hall and chanting for an hour and sitting in the cold. I liked Roshi, you know, and I liked his. I liked what Zen had done to him. I've been, you know, very, very privileged to bump into a number of people in my life who have made things a lot easier. It's hard to say exactly how. It's got something to do with love.
What do you mean, love?
It's just to be in the presence of someone who forgives you, you know, and the forgiveness is automatic and general. It isn't you, you know. I guess he's forgiven himself and the world and everything else, and is not, you know, operating in that mechanism of blame and shame and guilt and repentance. You know, there's a different kind of landscape. You know, since I inhabit it so infrequently, it's hard for me to speak about it. But when you're with people who habitually are operating on that landscape, there's a very a deep sense of relaxation overtakes you. So I'm not so interested in, you know, theological or religious goals you know. But I am interested in relaxation. Even though I labored over them, I'm very reluctant to really claim them, although I like the royalties.
But you recently lost all your money.
No, I don't recommend that as a spiritual discipline for anybody. But if it does happen to you, it's very interesting. It's enough to put a dent in your mood, but it really didn't for some odd reason. I don't know why.
It was a lot of money, though.
It was everything. It was everything. But I didn't know I had most of it, so, you know.
What's going to happen now with the money, I mean?
Well, the money seems to be gone. As far as the manager, you know, who was my dear friend, I'm still rather fond of her. But she, there's been a judgment of several $1 million against her. But, you know, she doesn't seem to have any money. It's impossible to collect it. But I don't know. I guess I should be more worried than I am, but I'm not. So what can I say? You know.
It's such a huge difference. I mean, it could have been quite rich, and now you're quite poor.
But you know, I've always lived a certain way that I thought was incredibly voluptuous. But you know, I find, you know, the simple life voluptuous. I like a good table. You know, a good chair and a good table. Because my taste has been for, you know, bare rooms and good solid tables. It's been easy to absorb this loss. Relationships that I had with people that were close to me deepened. You know, friendships deepened. My whole affective personal world deepened. My son said something to me that was wonderful. Speaking for him and his sister, he said, "Dad, do what you have to do, you know, to address the situation, which is quite grave." He said, "But don't do it for us, because we've had a good life and we can take care of ourselves." So, you know, it's very rare that a parent gets to hear that. That's almost worth the whole thing. Came out in, I guess, 1992 or 93, but I was writing it in 88, you know. Then I could say something that really meant something to me, because the whole world was celebrating the destruction of the Berlin Wall, for instance. And, you know, and I was ready to celebrate with everybody else, but I also had a feeling it was a terrible thing, that it would result in a shift in power and a disintegration of order that would result in murder, in widespread murder. So I was able to say, and I didn't know why exactly, but it was just because I was able to peel away the easy, the convenient, the intellectual, the rational, and I could say, "I've seen the future, brother, it is murder." And people accuse me of being an incredible pessimist, as they always have. But in this particular case, you know, I think that my insights were more or less accurate.
You have one that's quite similar here. Let's see now. It's this one. Can you read it?
Oh yeah. Oh, and one more thing. You're not going to like what comes after America. Everybody's saying, you know, America, Nazi Germany, easy, you know, the worst country in the world, the bully, the terrorist, you know. Let's forget about all that for a moment. You're not going to like what comes after America.
It has almost the same, I mean, the same prophetic, you know, sound.
Yeah, I mean, I don't want to, you know, promote myself as a prophet, but those are those are just insights that arise after you've, peeled off the easy positions. It's clear that the world is going through some convulsive period. And everything I've felt about it, I felt about it, it seemed to me the indications were already clear quite some time ago, and these events, that capture us with their immediacy and their violence and their savagery. I was feeling quite acutely, over a decade ago.
So 11th of September wasn't really
some people say it's what we deserve for crimes against God and for sins in the world. I wouldn't know. I'm just holding the fort since that day that they wounded New York. Some people say they hate us of old, our women unveiled, our slaves and our gold. I wouldn't know, I'm just holding the fort. But answer me this, I won't take you to court. Did you go crazy or did you report on that day that they wounded New York? That's all I want to say about it.
Oh yeah, from about 75 to 85, there wasn't much interest at all. In fact, my name was a kind of joke. When anybody wanted to, trot out some idea of despair or melancholy or depression or suicide, they generally associated my name with it.
Did that association annoy you?
I can't say it really annoyed me because I don't really live in that world that is, where these things are going on. And it had an effect on my economic situation, which I could have felt could have been improved, I thought, but I'd got a pretty thick skin, I mean, I've been putting stuff out since I was 20. I'm 58 now, so I got I'm pretty impervious to what's being said.
Do you think in some ways that it was good for you as a person, just developing as a person and as a writer, to be so late coming into what we will call for the moment the rock and roll world?
Well, that's what they say. You can never tell how anything's going to affect you. It's hard to speak from any point of view but experience. But I've seen what early fame and fortune do to a number of people, and it seems to wreck them pretty badly. It seems to push them around pretty badly. It seems to give them a kind of odd view of things. It wasn't until I was 35 that I actually began to make any money out of anything connected with, my writing or my singing.
You actually went to Nashville, or like having been a writer, having had books of poetry, having had novels out, you went to Nashville to become what exactly?
Well, I wasn't sure exactly what I wanted to become, but I know that I had to do something. I'd published a couple of novels and a number of collections of poetry, and I couldn't make a living. I'd gotten glorious reviews, from the New York Times and all over the place. In fact, I was hailed as, in fact, somebody said, I think it was at Boston, something or other, said, that James Joyce is not dead, he's alive and well and working in Montreal. I mean, they were really glorious reviews, and I couldn't pay any bills. And in retrospect, it seems the height of folly, to address your economic woes by becoming a country singer, especially when you weren't from the country and, you didn't have any roots in the whole matter at all. But that's what I had intended to do. I thought I had to do something. That was the only other thing I knew how to do. So I went down to Nashville.
And when down in Nashville you said, well, I'm going to pick up a guitar, I'm going to put some of this stuff that I write to music. Is it as simple as that?
Well, no, I'd always played, guitar and clarinet. Took piano lessons when I was a kid. Played clarinet in high school band and dance bands around town. And I was part of a country trio called the Buckskin Boys when I was a kid, 16 or 17. So country music was not foreign to me. I loved it. you know, I always could get this Wheeling, West Virginia, this radio station that played a lot of country stuff I used to listen to a lot. Grand Strategy, you know, just dodging the shrapnel. It's always seemed the same to me, to tell you the truth. Of course, things change, but I can't see for a man in his life that much changes.
Right, but by the same token then, just let's talk about one's environment or whatever else is in one's life. In other words, like you will actually say things on the album that you think that people will actually look back at some dreadful things, like for instance the Berlin Wall,
right.
like for instance Hiroshima, and say, hey, they were the good days. Is it that bad, the future?
Well, I don't know. I get a lot of resistance to that line, I've seen the future, baby, it is murder.
Mm.
You know, I got a lot of resistance to it in Europe. In the United States, the journalists I've spoken to, you know, not a raised eyebrow in the whole bunch. You know, over here where there's like full-fledged war raging about a half a mile down the road, you know, slaughtering going on all over the place, you know, people being attacked in their homes and shelters being burnt down, you know, famine down the street. Over here, like it's, like I've said something that really shouldn't be said. Well, the future's here. It is murder. So it's also, you know, a certain insanely cheerful tone to the record. If I just, you know, nailed that lyric up on the church door like Martin Luther or something, it might sound pretty grim, but it's, you know, it's attached to a pretty hot little dance track. Mm-hmm. So in a way, the words dissolve into the music, and the music dissolves in the words. You just got, you know, energy, just energy for that apocalyptic dance through the apocalypse. But yeah, I think it is pretty grim. I think somehow the social contract between people has frayed or deteriorated or dissolved. I think there is a return to tribalism. I think that the voices of the extreme have taken the glamour and the allure, and the center can no longer defend itself, can't mount a rhetoric that is inspiring. And I think people are more and more willing to defend their turf with homicide.
Mm. Okay, well then that means that with what's happening in Bosnia, with what's happening in Germany, with this great freedom that was supposed to have come with the wall breaking down as though it was going to just happen overnight without realising the cost over decades that we're going to have to pay for something like that, that in America, in another song you have, which is Democracy, you say democracy has come into America, which is ironic when you hear it once or twice. Yeah. But after that, is it because you're saying that because of the sort of ethnic and cultural differences in America that it is actually real democracy and it is actually trying to get itself together?
Well, I think that the song, you know, transcends the obvious irony of the hook. Democracy has come to the USA. What do you mean? There isn't any democracy there? Well, there isn't any democracy anywhere. America is as good an experiment in democracy as there is any place. And, you know, Europeans used to look, or until very recently, looked very skeptically to America, you know, a very ironic take on America, very superior take, I might say, about America, you know. But I think in America's been dealing, you know, over the past century with problems that Northern Europe, the Northern European industrial democracy are just starting to confront. The problem, you know, the conflict of races, the conflict of cultures. You know, in America, I mean, the confrontation of men and women is there. The confrontation of sexual orientation, gay against straight, is there. You know, there's all kinds of intense and urgent confrontations that are being faced up to in America that are just at the start of being recognized in Europe. So the laboratory of democracy that America really is, I think, deserves our goodwill and our affirmation and our blessings. And I think the song gets to that place. But it gets to that place in the style of a big city. You know, I mean, a big city is not a Sunday school. I mean, people are not continually going around, you know, affirming the divinity of man and the divine spark in all human beings, you know, and the sanctity of the individual. I mean, it's a little more cynical than that. So it has the style of big city speech, but it says that it's not coming from above. It's not being imposed. It's not the domain of a particular administration or ideology. That this faith we call democracy, that this new faith that we call democracy has a chance in America, and it's coming from unexpected places, through a crack in the wall, through a hole in the air, imperial, mysterious, in amorous array.
Well, do you therefore think that it is the religion of the West, and is that a bit of a sort of a serious put down, because we don't actually consider democracy to be what it in reality really is? In other words, that it's not necessarily as wonderful as we sometimes try and define it.
Well, I don't presume. It's just a shot at it. I don't presume to have got a handle on the whole thing. I don't think anybody can. But I think it probably is the religion of the West, and probably a great religion, because it affirms other religions, which religions don't tend to do. And a great culture because it affirms other cultures. I think it's just beginning. I think it is based on faith, based on a real appetite for fraternity and equality and justice, and I think we're just on the edge of it. I think we're just working it out. I mean, until very recently, we thought democracy was, the masses were going to like Shakespeare and Mozart or something like that. That was our idea of democracy, Well, it's not going to be that way, It's going to be something we don't know, but it has its own, as I say, they're imperial, mysterious, in amorous array. It's something that nobody can resist. I say it's like the Sermon on the Mount, which I don't pretend to understand at all. It's got implications. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. Blessed are the poor in heart, for they shall see God. I mean, it's coming through a crack in the wall. It's coming from our failures. It's coming from the recognition that human beings fail, that we have been expelled from paradise, that we got to put this scene together, that it implies imperfections, it implies failures, and that somehow democracy is a space, a mental space, been a very voluntary cooperation between the powers that be in either countries, and people have voted with their francs and with their pounds and with their pesetas. They voted for that American culture. Nobody asked everybody, to line up in front of the McDonald's on the Champs-Élysées. The French have a pretty distinguished reputation for food. If they didn't want this stuff, they wouldn't line up for it. There seems to be something, incidentally, I think that the American hamburger, even the fast food one, is vastly underrated. I think it's a pretty good piece of meat, I think that it results. It comes from a kind of defensiveness of our own culture. Nobody in America resents buying French wine. If they want it, there's good California wine. And nobody puts you down for buying it. Nobody puts women down. Doesn't represent a defeat of American culture. The fact that women like French perfume. You know what I mean? It's a lot of it just is the expression of the kind of defensiveness. Nobody puts down. British rock and roll comes to America. Nobody. American musicians don't get up in arms about the people taking away their jobs or anything like that. Rock and roll has kind of imperialized the whole world. Probably behind the whole destruction of the Soviet Empire. That's where the ideas came from. So I don't think it's altogether. I think it in Western Europe, a lot of it is just the defensiveness of people.
Do you think that rock and roll did something 20 years ago or 22 years ago in America, around the time of, say, Kent State University and all that, around the time when you, say, were between album number 2 and 3 for you, when you were right there in the vanguard, but not necessarily trying to do a Crosby, Stills and Nash or a Bob Dylan or even like a Joni Mitchell or whatever. Yeah. And for instance, in terms of helping to sort of halt the Vietnam War or that sort of thing. In other words, that it actually was capable of some sort of political something or other that it isn't capable of now.
I don't know. The magic moves around. It goes from music to writing to movies. There doesn't seem much of it around anywhere right now. It's no need for us to throw up our hands in despair. Someone's going to arise with some kind of cultural tool to, make the heart manifest. it doesn't seem to be around right now. You know, I don't know. I think we all played our tiny parts. You know, I resisted the Vietnamese War, but I also resisted the rhetoric that was resisting it. You know, I wasn't so fond of that because maybe I just had a feeling that, you know, a government is a kind of fragile institution, and there's no point in throwing out the baby with the bathwater. You know, so I mean, I was kind of fighting everybody at the time. In a poem I guess I wrote around 1970, published in 73 in The Energy of Slaves, I said, you know, I have to contend with all the flabby liars of the Aquarian age.
And looking back, that's the way it was. I mean, and a lot of those went into Wall Street, went into good jobs, went into sort of...
Yeah, there's nothing wrong with that. I mean, you know, the so-called revolution of the 60s lasted for about 11 minutes, you know, before the hucksters took it over and sold it. That's okay. I mean, you know, there doesn't have to be... I mean, art and commerce have always gone hand in hand. That's just the way it works.
Do you think in some ways that if people did a lot of dancing in the 70s and the 80s, that maybe those last few years of the 60s, the Dylan 60s, whatever you want to call them, could possibly be on the way back? That new thing that people might use, that new tool, could actually be music again, music that speaks to people?
It's hard to say. A number of things came to my mind when you posed the question. One was after the age of Dylan or the age of the lyric, and you know, in the hands of Dylan, it was pretty good. Even in my own hands, it wasn't bad. But a lot of this stuff was really like incoherent, indulgent stuff. I don't know. I couldn't make head or tail of it most of the time. Well, it doesn't matter whether I could or not. The thing is that I think people got tired of listening and felt like dancing. You know, and they danced for about 20 years, and it's completely reasonable that they get tired dancing, want to sit down for a while and listen again. And maybe voices will arise. My instinct, although I have nothing to back this up, my instinct is it's not going to come through the song that way. How it is going to come, I don't know, or if it's going to come at all. I understand a lot of psychedelic drugs are around again.
Yeah, with the dance culture and the rave culture. Yeah.
Now that produces some very, very interesting effects, and maybe that's what it's all about, is what drug the culture's using. You know, usually the culture's using, you know, alcohol, nicotine, and caffeine, you know, and that seems to produce a certain kind of expression. Some of it is great, you know. I don't want to take a side on this matter or other. Psychedelics produce a very different kind of vision that has a very more obvious rapport with the religious vision, just the place it puts you. Even though you've got like an ideological difference in the shaman, for instance, between the Collins position that drugs should only be used, or like Terence McKenna, that you know, drugs should only be used like in a ritualistic, investigative situation under guidance, or Collins' position that drugs should be used, you know, as a recreational sport. However you look at the way psychedelic drugs are used, it's going to have a real effect if the thing takes off. I mean, people forget that acid was the real fuel of the 60s. It was that vision that enabled people to summon the energy to crack the whole edifice, or in their own minds anyways. A lot of them just cracked their minds, and the edifice remained quite intact.
Well, then, if you take it the controlled way, say like William Hurt in Altered States or something, or if you take it the other way, which is the recreational way, the Timothy Leary and Dropout and etc. I mean, when you did that in the late 60s, was it, I mean, like, for instance, if you're talking there about, it might be a religious experience, and like, if you're really out of it, say, or wherever you happen to be on acid, are you going to try and tell me that if God fell on your head, you'd know he was there, sort of thing? I mean, you wouldn't necessarily. Most of the people I know who took it then certainly wouldn't have a clue, you know? I mean, you don't necessarily mean religious as so straightforwardly obvious.
No, I mean that it's a unifying vision. It's a unifying vision. It's just, I don't know if it's any good at all. I think that what the good thing about psychedelics is that in a small number of people, it will lead to serious investigation into these matters. I mean, I know that the Zendos and the ashrams and the Zen centers where people are really, studying themselves with a certain kind of diligence. A lot of those are old acid heads, and they just couldn't get any further on acid. Now, the thing about acid is that it binds you to a place. The thing comes fast and furious, and there are visionary experiences that are afforded, but there's something very limited about the thing. And if you want to go further, you've got to drop the stuff and start sitting alone with yourself with no end, no goal,
Song earlier on, just to go back to what the song was to you, your first album was the one that really, you got there, okay, you started late, but the first album was the big one in terms of everybody immediately knew who Leonard Cohen was. Now, subsequent albums, you wrote a lot about love, obviously relationships, etc. And a lot of the relationships in your songs all seem to end before they would seem to have had a sort of a natural end, if you like. So if that was the case, do you think that if relationships end early, that they're more perfect in some ways?
Well, there is that cultural artifact which is very prevalent in our literature, and it's been there for a long time, of like doomed lovers or star-crossed lovers, and the thing is intense from beginning to end, and it's brief and it's sad. I don't know about all the other cultures because I don't know their literature, but I imagine it's pretty constant. It's a pretty stable human construction, So yeah, there is that kind of perfection to love found and lost and deeply experienced for the brief moments of time. But there's, of course, we know there's another kind of association that yields its own nourishment. And we call that marriage. And that is the real monastery of our times. That is the real spiritual adventure, and I think there are very few people suited for it. I certainly have never felt I was eminently suited for it. It's the real cemetery of love, but not the cemetery of true love, but the cemetery of this love that we're speaking of, this intense, flame-like, sodium-burning love, that fizzles out or is cut off. But that other kind of love that is free from love and free from hate and that transcends personality, that's what we call marriage, and that seems to be where the real nourishment is.
What about the love of children? I mean, you have 2 kids. Is that something that you obviously have no regrets about not getting married, but you obviously, very happy that you've had 2 kids?
Well, I never wanted them, to tell you the truth, at the beginning, and for a long time I felt I'd been maneuvered into it, and probably had been. I didn't like the idea. First of all, kids are the only event that moves you out of center stage. I'm not just talking for a performer. I mean, in your own life, it's the only thing that ever happens to you where you stop thinking of yourself as the star of the whole play. I mean, the demand and the urgency that kids present is unavoidable. And it's the only time in your life that you stop thinking about yourself. So I didn't like it. I didn't like that at all. Of course you love the kids and goo-goo and everything else, but I really didn't like the maintenance. But I'm sure glad I had them because, they're about the best company I have in my life.
Okay, well, back to music. Just one thing about that great phrase that people have often used down through the years, like that white men can't sing the blues. On the same level, do you think for great poetry there has to be great suffering?
Well, I'd like to downplay that side of it. I think that great suffering is available to everybody, not just artists, and that this is a very self-righteous vision that artists like to present about themselves, that maybe they suffer more than anybody. This can't be true, and it isn't true. So great suffering is available to everybody. So I think it should be discounted from the equation, But what I think is forgotten about art is that it demands work. And I think Yeats said it very nicely. He said, poets, like women, know that we must labor to be beautiful. Now, of course, as Browning said, the first fine careless frenzy. I mean, you may be able to pick those phrases out of the air, especially at the beginning of the whole affair. But what has been forgotten, I think, and is that it's work. Forget the suffering, forget the anguish, forget the agonizing characteristics that have been ascribed to the whole activity. A lot of people have forgotten that this is work. So unfortunately, I haven't been able to forget it because I'm not one of that tribe that does the great song in the cafe or the back of the taxi cab. So suffering, I'd remove that from the equation because everybody got that. Hard work, almost everybody got that, but artists. Irish poets, learn your craft.
Well, what about Leonard Cohen then, with the amount of time that it takes you to do something? You're not massively prolific in terms of your recorded work, in terms of being a performer on stage with the guitar, etc. I mean, it's been 4 years since the 1988 album. It's been a few years since before that. I mean, you take your time.
Yeah, I take my time, and I don't put anything out until it's finished. And maybe I'm lazy, but I don't have that impression. I have the feeling that I'm working pretty hard on this stuff. And as I say, I'd like to be one of those guys like Hank Williams that can knock it off in 20 minutes. And there's no guarantee of the excellence of the song just because it takes a couple of years to finish. But I'm always working on a bunch of songs, and it always takes me 3-4 years to do it.
Well, then how important is music to you? I mean, like, is it the writing? Is writing more important? Like, could we see another book of poetry? Or?
Well, I gotta, I keep blackening pages, where the lines don't come to the end of the page. And I'm going to put one of those books out one of these days, but I seem to have surrendered completely to this activity called songwriting. Got really interested, and some kind of lever, was thrown in my own personal life, not that it might concern anybody else. But around 82, somehow, I got very interested in this whole affair. I thought I was interested before in writing, and I was, and I did serious work, I think. But since 82, 83, the past 10 years, I've really thought about little else. I've been taking care of my own personal life here and there, but the activity of songwriting has become, I've surrendered to it. Nothing else going on for me.
All right. Well, then, in other words, then mapping human emotions, the song is, the song is a good vehicle, is it?
Well, it seems to work for me, and the music's real important too. It's not, every time you change. Well, the thing keeps adjusting one to the other. If you change a line of the lyric, you generally have to change the way the musical line works, and you change the musical line, you got to change the language line too. So, they're born together. They're born painfully together.
Well, can I just take one lyric from one song? Obviously, like one of the most famous in the early days, Suzanne. Just one thing in that song where you say, "Only drowning men can see him." What do you mean? Are we supposed to take that literally to say that that's when you see Jesus or something?
Well, Jesus himself said that. He said, "Blessed are the poor in heart, for they shall see God." In other words, we have this idea that that there's a triumphant position in life. That we stand here as conquerors, that we claim the universe in some sort of way, but it just don't work that way. It's only when your back's against the wall that you lift up your voice in prayer and supplication. It's
a sort of experience when you finally get a body of work out, be it a book, a novel, or a book of poetry, or be it an album, that, for instance, like, if you write about love a lot of the time, and like, just take a song like There Ain't No Cure for Love or something, that it's some sort of a disease, that if you can get something written down about it and get into the inner sanctum of it or whatever, this inner struggle that you sort of write about a lot, that if you can get into that by getting it out, it's a sort of a, on a higher plane than your man down the road.
Well, only in the sense of, nobody can control their lives. At least I must speak for myself and a few people I know, but just for myself, you kind of make a mess of your life. And, you do the best you can, but you can't really order it too militantly. You know, things fall where they do. But your work is a different thing. You know, you can really work on your work. You can really organize it. You can really polish it, and in that sense, yeah, you can locate your self-respect in your work. But in terms of the actual significance of the work, I think it's beyond meaning and significance. And you know, I use the metaphor of the diamond. I mean, like, what's a diamond for? You know, well, all a diamond is something that's cut and polished and amplifies light. It doesn't have a meaning beyond that, you know. And that's the way I feel about my verses, you know. It's not about the meaning, you know. It's about the cutting and the polishing and the amplification of light.
Right. Okay, well, listen, finally then, Leonard, the idea that you once said that you aspired to being a minor poet years ago, have you been happy with the work always? Are you always happy with something that when it comes out, or you think, when you look back a few years later, wow, that was a bit naive, or whatever?
Well, yeah, there are some lines that I you know, regret. I won't say regret, but would have difficulty standing behind, maybe. But on the other hand, you know, I've been putting together this compilation of verse, and I was looking at stuff that I wrote when I was 15 and 16, and you know, sometimes I think it's been downhill since then. I mean, there's some good stuff.
I spoke to Ronnie Spector on the program some time back, and she had these really terrible stories about her ex-husband. You did Death of a Ladies' Man with him. It's an album that a lot of people will talk to you about because they can put a handle on that one. They might miss out on New Skin for the Old Ceremony or recent songs, or whatever, but they'll hone in on Death of a Ladies' Man because of the Phil Spector stories that go with it. Do you look upon it as a sort of an interesting experiment that sort of gets a thumb sideways as opposed to a thumbs up or a thumbs down, that it could have maybe been better without Phil Spector?
Well, it could have been better without Leonard Cohen. You know, I think that the track...
Well, it was with that Leonard Cohen at the end, wasn't it?
More or less, yeah. But I mean, at a certain point, I even suggested to Phil, I think, that he's a good singer, Phil, incidentally. Nobody knows that. But I felt it took a different kind of singer, a more powerful singer. I think I could do it now. I think it could handle it now. But I think that record would have been a great record without Leonard Cohen. I think if it had Bill Medley on it, or... you know, one of the Righteous Brothers or something like that, you know, or Aaron Neville, let's say, today, that kind of voice.
Somebody who could give him a wall of sound. And
sometimes, somebody who could really, you know, climb that wall and walk on it like the China Wall and rejoice on top of that wall. It would have been a grand piece of work. As it was, I don't think I had the chops to meet it.
But at the same time, like, the circumstances were pretty strange. I mean, how crazy was the scene? Guns, and guns.
It was crazy as you can possibly imagine. I mean, it was crazier than I thought at the time. Looking back on it, I see that, you know, everybody was around the bend. I mean, Phil was around the bend, and I was around the bend for being there. You know, my own life was breaking up, and God knows what was happening to him because he was over the hill. You know, I mean, everybody was armed. I mean, you know, you'd slip on bullets. I mean, there were, you know, your hamburger was full of guns. I mean, you know, everywhere you turned there was a gun, and you know, and that would have been bad enough. But everybody was drunk too, you know, and I remember Phil pulled a gun on the fiddle player, you know, in the song Fingerprints, and he was a country boy, and he just stood up and put his fiddle in the case and walked out. And Phil approached me with a bottle of Manischewitz red wine, and that's a kosher wine, sweet wine. You wouldn't want to drink it. I don't know what Phil was drinking it. And 45 in the other, put his arm around my shoulder and muzzled the gun into my neck and said, "I love you, Leonard." You know, I said, "I hope you do, Phil."
Okay, Leonard, just one last thing I forgot about that I really want to know about. It's the album I'm Your Fan.
Yeah.
For a lot of bands of recent years, bands I play on the programme all the time, line them all up, and these have been on every day for the last few years. They suddenly come out with a Leonard Cohen album. How does it make you feel?
It makes you feel great, you know. There's nothing I can say about it. You know, people ask me what I think about this performance or that performance. Well, you know, I go into immediate critical suspension when I hear somebody covering one of my songs, and to have a whole album of your songs done by these great bands, well, there's nothing you can say about it, but thank you.
Well, thank you too, Leonard.
Thanks for coming over.